Oh, I take it everyone. I take it everyone is able to see the slide that's up that says Pono Labs, 3 ideas worth sharing.
Yep.
Awesome. So to Pepe's point, I will introduce myself. Magical slide with a picture. So like most of you, I've got a bunch of experience in this space. So I've got product management experience as well as coaching experience. So today's conversation really is not going to try and go after some edge case or avant-garde approach for what is Agile, because what I've found in my experience from a fair number of different places that I have worked between IBM, PayPal, most recently Endurance/Newfold, whether the company is small or large, the idea of having some basic principles that are, let's just have a really good team, and that team can work together to solve whatever their problems are. And when you want to introduce something new, there's no shortage of new ideas or things that the team can try. The problem that I've seen is that teams don't necessarily want to try those new things. So if you can get to a structure where the team has built some amount of trust with you as the coach, or not as the coach, but it's a team that you're involved with in some way and supporting in some way, that really what you'd like them to try and aim at is when someone shares new ideas, how they can figure out how to fold them in. And so that's really where the topic of sharing 3 ideas comes from. The idea is so you can walk away with something that's concrete, tangible. I'm hoping at least one thing you can leave with tonight and go, I can try that. I can try that, at work tomorrow. If you're looking for your next gig, then it's something you can say, hey, this is something that I think might help your teams. I'd love to help coach your teams to get there. Is there anything that folks are like, hey, that's not really what I want to hear tonight? Is that kind of in anyone's thought? And it'd be okay if it's not, if you're like, I don't know if I really want to hear about that tonight. I'm seeing people smile, smirk, so I'm assuming it's okay.
Yeah, works for me.
All right. So the first one, teamwork. This first basic concept, we're going to get to the more tactical, but I'm going to start off with the concept of teamwork. Has anyone here heard of the book Extreme Ownership? How to Lead Navy SEALs? Okay, so it seems like 3 or 4 of you have. Some people aren't on video, so I can't tell if you're shaking your head or you're not. So I'll just assume that you haven't heard about it. And so there are some folks that haven't heard about it. But for the folks that have heard about it, the reason why I picked this book is because in lots of cases, we spend a lot of time thinking about how teams work in software and in product. And that gets us one perspective, one mindset. But when you actually start thinking about teams, and I think about teams from the perspective of when something hits the fan, so to speak, and your life is involved, then it's like, you got to figure out how to be like more tight as a team than say, I've never in my life been worried about whether or not I'm going to come home at the end of the day. That's never something I've ever worried about. So my team members could potentially maybe not be, I don't have to have as much trust in them. Whereas if I was worried about whether or not I was going to come home, I think I would want to have a certain level of trust that's significantly more than what I have. And so I like to use this as a way to think about it. And so the link, I'll obviously share the PDF with Pepe so you can get to the link of the book. There are a couple of summaries. So if you don't want to read the book, let's be honest, sometimes you want to know if the book's is worth reading. So the link that I have in number 3 is a book summary. So you can take 5 or 10 minutes, look at it and go like, oh, like this seems like it might be worth my time. What I want to talk about for you guys is the book has a couple of different topics that structures the teamwork concepts in the form of Navy SEALs in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so it talks about how they had the military operations going on, and then they have the principle of about 12 or so, and I captured some of them, not all 12, to recap. And so the idea is there's no bad ideas, just bad leaders. And so a leader must first believe in the mission, right? These are basic concepts you've probably heard a fair amount of, so there's nothing surprising. The question is, how often are we doing it? Regardless of our role, you don't need to do these things if you're the scrum master, the coach, etc., or if you're an architect, right? It doesn't matter what your role is. All of the things here are things that anyone can do. It doesn't require you to have a certain title. So what I thought might be interesting, and Pepe, I don't think we need to use any breakout rooms. I think we can just take 10 minutes or less. And the idea here that I wanted to explore with all of you is, what do you actually think from just the topics I have here are things that you would really want to focus in on with your teams tomorrow? And if you don't have a specific team that you're working with, what would you have focused with the last teams that you worked on? So for example, if I was on a team with Pepe and there were a couple of other people, I would say one of the things that I really like to focus in on is empowering decision making, because that's an area where I can help the team build greater trust among other team members. Not quicker, but it seems like it's the straighter way to getting trust built among the team. There are times when I think other things might work, but that's the one area where it seems like you really can sort of like cut through all the noise, and you can start getting some of those other areas where you can reduce the ego, and you can sort of attach some of the other elements. So Alex, it looks like you have something on your mind that you just got to get out. So what's on your mind, man?
Yeah, no, the empowering decision making, that's the root, that's the foundation of any team. And it is the question of building trust. And if there is no trust, you don't know if you're coming home and the guy next to you, the Navy SEALs next to you, well, normally he's going to put his life on the line for you in order for you to get home, and maybe he's not going to be able to make it. So that empowering decision making, that is beautiful. The question that I have is, and I do agree with this, ego clouds and disrupts, granted. Now, how do we reduce the ego, and not necessarily of the team members, but also of the leaders, of the manager, of the supervisor, in order to create that trust, to sew it together, to sew everybody together? Because when ego comes in, basically it's just starts to cut, and I'm important, and move away. It's my idea, and my idea is better than yours, and which is stupid and wrong. Like everybody has ideas, and let's figure out what's the best one. So there are no bad ideas. But how do we reduce the ego?
So before we start our 10-minute exercise, I'm happy to, how I would approach that is, one thing with extreme ownership, which is in the larger recap and in the book itself, is that you can only control yourself, right? Like you can't control anyone else, right? Like that's the other thing that the book really gets at, is you do these things, you are effectively a beacon on a hill, right? So you have to internalize them yourself. And by internalizing them, it is screaming to everyone else that you interact with that these principles are part of who you are. And the last thing I'll share with you tonight is a canvas. And so I'll give you a very tactical thing that you can do that helps to do everything that's in the first two slides that I'm going to show you. So I'm giving you sort of two principles and then one tactical thing, and then hoping that at the very least there's one practical thing that you can start using immediately. So all I'll say is wait till I show you the canvas and then sort of process that, and then ask your question again to see if it, like, ask your question in yourself to see, is it answering, or do you think it might be difficult for you to do it? And if it is, then by all means, ask again. Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to put 10 minutes on the clock and give us some time. I'd like to hear from all the folks who are here and just discuss what of these items would you focus on and why? Does that make sense? All right, so that means you all got to come off mute. And for the people who are not sharing video, doesn't matter. Just come off mute. We come off mute. Would love to hear your input. I'm not obviously going to call on anyone, so I'll say we're all coaches, right? We shouldn't have a problem jumping in. So I'm gonna start 10 minutes, and we're off.
I like the no bad teams, only bad leaders. I actually just retired about a week ago, and maybe I'll get back in a year or so, but right now I'm retired, and it really was around having so many leaders who just kept pointing at the teams and not looking inward. I think it's huge. You have to, as a leader, you have to look inward. What are you doing to contributing? How are you contributing to the lack of success? And how are you contributing to, the fourth principle, right? Build teams around motivated individuals and give them the support they need. How many times do we not give leaders, don't give folks the support they need?
Thanks, Sue.
For
Ari, I
me,
think you're talking, but you're on mute. So I think for the sake of this discussion, if you just take yourself off mute and don't worry about background noise so much, it might be helpful. And then that way we don't get people talking and they're on mute. So just jump in the swimming pool.
All right. I was first off gonna echo what Sue said, but then say that one of the things that I find on my teams isn't so much empowering decision making as creating that mindset where people will make decisions and take ownership. There's a lot of culture that seems to be sort of stay in your lane, and I think that part of the mindset that I think of as the Agile mindset is this: see the picture, no more lanes. We're all on the same team. Take ownership and see what you can keep doing to help solve whatever problems as they arise. And part of that is empowering people to do that.
I'd also say, when you empower people to do it, especially at the beginning, you need to be really careful how you respond. Because if someone takes the risk and becomes empowered and goes out to do that, and then to make the decision to not stay in their lane, and if the reaction is bad, if the reaction is like, why didn't you stay in the lane? They're very unlikely to do it again.
which I think tie back into psychological safety, right? They don't feel safe to speak up. A big point for me on this one is the last one. If you don't understand decisions, ask why. I think that also ties into, if you don't understand because you just simply don't know. The amount of hours and days and weeks I've wasted in my career working with people because they didn't say they didn't know. And you find out later on that they didn't know something and they messed something up because they were afraid to speak or afraid to say, I don't know. I find that can be a huge impediment. When I ran ships for a living, I encouraged people to come to me with questions. And that was after learning. Some of my crew came to me and said, you're not as approachable as you think you are, and you should probably change a few things. And I did. And after that, it was amazing. It was magic. And people were not afraid to raise their hand and say, I don't know. Or if I asked them to do something, to ask why. And it just changed the whole culture aboard the ship. So that one really resonates with me.
How often do you share in general to all of you hey, I don't know what that is, be the first person through the door to say, hey, I don't understand. Okay, 3, 4 folks. Okay, great. 5.
I'll bite. To me, what resonates big time is the second bullet. Leader must first believe in the mission. And I think that, I raised my hand when you asked how many of you, raise their hand and ask questions or say in public, I don't know. I think it's part of the journey. I think that comes with learning that not knowing, it's putting oneself in a vulnerable position. It's actually enabling those conditions for psychological safety, like sort of like being humble and understanding that. And that comes with some kind of maturity, is what I'm trying to say. So for me, the leader must first believe in the mission. I mentioned those 2 elements earlier is because as coaches, with time, I learned that leaders, we have 2 main levers of modifying behavior. And the first is modeling the behavior ourselves. And the second one is coaching. So if we don't believe in what we're doing, that I think that especially in the age of information, folks can detect the BS very quickly. That's what I got.
Any other thoughts from folks?
Hello, everyone.
Hello?
Hi.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking like out loud about empowering decision making in a team. My question is, doesn't mean that withdrawing this power from another part of the organization. Like if we are empowering specific parts of the organization, usually, at least in my organization, this is mean withdrawing it or taking this power from another part, which sometimes put us in some awkward moments, like and sometimes this will escalate to specific impediments and conflicts. What do you suggest if in these cases?
So empowering, the way that it's described in this book, Extreme Ownership, is not about taking it away from anyone else. It's about the teams that are closest to the work providing a solution for the things that they are seeing, the things that are right up in front of their face, and saying, hey, in order for this to get resolved, we need to move it to the left or move it down or whatever it might be. So for example, in the software space, it might be, hey, the build is broken. The team says, hey, we're going to go fix it. We'll reach out to, if you have a DevOps team, hey, we'll reach out with them. We'll figure out how to get to the root cause and start working it, making the communications right. So that's one. The second is the idea of extreme ownership is starting with yourself first. And so if you're looking at yourself, how to at the very least how can you empower a team if you don't know how to empower yourself? So you need to first think about how you might do that in your organization for yourself, and then take it to your team, and then you can scale it from that point. But the idea from extreme ownership is starting within yourself, because you are part of the team, and a coach is a very integral part. Well, every person on the team is integral, but the coach has the very specific responsibility and expertise for helping others to develop this within themselves. So it's a great topic for retrospective or an ad hoc conversation when you think the team is receptive to hearing it, and or one-on-ones, reaching out to those people one-on-one that would be receptive, and triangulating it from that perspective. If they're looking at extreme ownership and they're trying these things themselves, you're trying these things yourself, over the course of 3 to 6 months, you will see a change in the culture. Does that make sense, Ali? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you so much.
All right.
And I'll piggyback on this. Again, we're talking about the Navy SEALs, so it is a teamwork, okay? I found that it's very useful to have team building exercises once a month. Like, they don't have to be on a weekly basis, but once a month. So like this, you get the entire team together, and for half an hour, like, what does that cost in the end? Taking in consideration of the gains that you actually get a cohesive team. Because everybody are more relaxed. We're not talking about work. Let's make it fun, and it's not a going out activity, right? It's, again, we're still in the work environment. What I liked also about what you said, Justin, the one-on-ones, I do them on a monthly basis, like. And of course, they know that the door is always open. Like, you don't need to wait for the month to pass in order to bring me problems. Like, I have an issue with this. So the one-on-ones are, in my point of view, they are essential in order to get the pulse of everybody, pulse of the team and of the system, and to know where there are issues that need to be addressed from our side.
All right. Thanks for everyone that shared. So we're going to move to the next slide now. I'm a little bit behind. I want to make sure we get some time for the third one. That's my fault, though. Not your fault. All right. So next one, motivation, which gets at a little bit deeper. And so this is more at the individual level. And so the idea is, what is this? And so just by a show of hands, since most of us are on video, how many people have heard of Dan Pink's book Drive? So seems like half have and half have not. So the cheat code here is, if you Google, and for those of you who have 2 monitors, you can do it at the same time that you're on this call. Or even if you don't have 2 monitors, you don't have to, you can. So there's a TED Talk that, if you just Google TED Talk and Dan Pink Drive, it'll pop right up. It's probably about 13 years old at this point, something like that. There's, at the bottom, there's the summary again, that I'll share the PDF with Pepe, and you guys will get it. And then the real quick takeaway, the recap here is that there's 2 different things. There's the algorithmic, the routine. So Dan Pink talks about this. The TED Talk's actually really solid. So it's maybe like 18 minutes. He'll get into it if you haven't heard it before. And if you haven't read the book, a great place to start. Really, what you have is, if it's a routine exercise, we'll say like vacuuming. You know how to vacuum. If you haven't done it recently, you can learn really quickly. It's a rote activity. And so if he talks about, there's motivation there, that you can compensate people when it's just doing the same thing over and over and over. You don't really have to have any innovation of thought in order to make it work and to get the volume up. So think in the business world, when you think cold calling, right? A lot of sales is based on make 100 calls a day. You're just making calls, and then you're taking that information and you're taking the lead and you're dumping it off to someone else who's going to follow up with that lead, but you're just going through it. The next is the heuristic. This is the part where if you're story mapping in front of a whiteboard, hey, we've got this problem, how do we solve it? We've had maybe some things that maybe are like it, but it's not exactly the same thing. You need to ideate around that. You need to pull in concepts where you need to build themes. The idea is you're doing something that's net new, that is new and not a rote activity. So it's effectively the opposite of just the rote activity is the way to think of the heuristic. And so the idea is, and this is not a shock to you, I can't imagine it would be, but the idea of setting goals, when you set goals for yourself, you're more inclined to do them, right? When someone sets goals for you, you're like, I want to pay my mortgage, so like I'll try a little. But you get significantly more effort and inspiration when you partner up with people and say, hey, what do you think if we try and solve this together? Like solve this goal? Is this a useful way of working to solve this problem? Sometimes it's like, hey, yeah, I agree. Like that's a problem we should totally solve. Let's work on it. Or in some cases you get, hey, I don't think that's the biggest problem for us to be solving. I think maybe we should be focusing on something else. And so that's also something that the book calls out and unearths. One other thing that's part of Agile that the book also unearths is the idea, and you guys, by a quick show of hands, how many of you have heard of the Marshmallow Project? Okay, so some have, some haven't. So this is the typical sort of team building exercise where, so for those of you who haven't heard about it, you take a group of folks and you ask them to use spaghetti, dried spaghetti, and build up a tower as high as they can that can support a marshmallow. And so what the research finds is that the people who do well are who you would think. Architects do exceptionally well. So if they didn't, then I think there'd be a material problem in the buildings that we're in. So that's good that they do well at this exercise. And then the other people who do really well are little kids because they're not afraid to fail. Like, oh, that didn't work. Let's try this. That didn't work. Oh, let's try this. Oh, that didn't work. That's okay. Let's try this other idea. Oh, that didn't work. I got a ton of ideas. Let's keep going. And anyone who's been around a little kid, they're not discouraged by having failed. That's not a thing that discourages them. It's just not. And the people who do the poorest are MBA students. So if you watch the TED Talk, he's got all the research and it's interesting. If you read the book, it's also got more detail than the TED Talk. But for the sake of this conversation, and the reason why it's helpful is as coaches, as people who are helping teams to get better that we're working with, we need to figure out, and this is probably an area that is going to really be helpful in one-on-ones, really trying to understand what motivates people and helping them to understand how, in the context of the team, they can focus on the interesting new work. Because the thing that really gets people excited is the autonomy of solving a problem and setting a goal that they think is interesting. And so again, you got to figure out as a coach, what are some different ways, and I'll actually get into that in my next slide, or start to get into my next slide. How do we actually get people to open up and talk about those things that they think are interesting goals, interesting challenges? So from that perspective, I thought it might be interesting to take a couple minutes and just talk about what do we think the groups we're working with, how they are doing with the routine versus the not routine. I'm sure there's probably some thoughts out there. So instead of taking 10 minutes, we'll just take 5 to make sure that we don't go over so much on time. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say and share on that. Does the question make sense? I mean,
Okay, I'll jump in.
okay.
So for the routine is basically you're in a matrix, you're doing the same thing. That's the way that I understand it. You're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And okay, you know the process, you know the procedure, that's it. Now for the new thing that comes and that is brought on your desk or a situation or whatever, I think it's a question of mindset in order not to, first of all, to stay calm from the previous slide, not to freak out, and to realize that there is a solution. So when you already have that mindset and everything comes in, and not being afraid of asking why or how or asking for help, knowing that your team is there, I think that is, look, I don't know, like I'm put in this situation, I don't know how to deal with it. What do you think about it? Or writing an email, like it can be as simple as I'm writing an email and by the way, I need a second pair of eyes to actually give me some feedback on the way that I wrote the email or anything else. But being flexible and not being afraid of failure and of asking for help.
Definitely. Any other thoughts? Come on, we're all thinking something. Okay, for the sake of time, I'll move on to the next, and hopefully this will be the, oh my gosh, it was so worth coming, or, oh, wah, wah. All right. So how many of you are familiar with the concept of a team canvas? Two people. Okay, great. So for the two people who raised their hand, what is your understanding of a team canvas?
I don't know who the other person was that jumped in. I'm more than happy to share. So this can be, a team canvas can comprise a lot of different things, from their working agreement to their vision, their mission, and what's important to all of them, and how they're going to work together, which is part of their working agreement.
Great. And Dorothy, have you found that those are successful, mixed results, other?
It depends upon what type of team I'm working with. If it's a team that's delivering some kind of functionality all the time, highly useful. If it's a non-IT team, again, down in the weeds delivering something, highly useful. At a leadership team level, the way they work doesn't come up so much for them, but more of what they're resonating around, their vision and their mission piece resonates more with them, and not so much principles, but what do they value?
Got it. So kind of like,
So the level of it changes depending upon what type of team.
okay, so if it's like executive managers, not team, but sort of managers, we'll just call that one bucket, even though it's maybe two buckets. You're
Mhm.
saying that they're looking at more the why and the reasoning behind doing something. And then if it's a tactical, hey, we're in the weeds, we need to get something done, they get value from the sort of X's and O's of a canvas. Is that kind of?
Yeah, how we're gonna work together, how we're gonna resolve conflict, when are we meeting, what are we meeting for, things like that.
Gotcha. And then I think maybe it was Linda, the other person who raised your hand. Do I have that right?
And I'm using them for the teams that are producing something as opposed to management teams and that type of stuff. And I find it's a great way when you're forming a new team to really accelerate them through the 4 phases of team formation, right? Because you're getting down on paper some of the things that they might trip over and struggle as they're storming. And you also raise awareness that these are things that you need to think about, so that you can operate more smoothly together. So because folks don't necessarily think of 4 phases of team formation, and that you need operating principles, you need the values, you need to understand how you're going to work with other people, their strengths and weaknesses. So I found it very, very useful.
Awesome. Was there anyone else who's using canvases?
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Are we talking about Canvas, the product, or Canvas as a concept?
Canvas as a concept, number 2.
Okay, because that was a bit confusing to me. I'm going, are we using Canvas? I have used it. It's great, but
That's a
We're
tool.
talking over here and you're thinking over there.
Yeah.
Hey,
So the next question for Dorothy and Linda, do you two have a perspective on how you have delivered using the canvas? So kind of to Ari's point, like I'm talking about sort of a piece of paper, whiteboard, the conceptual piece. So stepping from that, how have you practically deployed it? Have you used PowerPoint? Have you used a tool? If so, what was that tool?
I've and anywhere between, it's a big post-it note up on the wall when we were all together, to Mural was the tool that we used mostly for cross-team collaboration at my last company. So,
Okay. So you use the Mural template because there's a
yeah,
team canvas template.
yep.
All right.
And for myself, it's always been whiteboards, whether it's in a meeting room or asynchronous collaboration, cloud-based whiteboard of some type. I've used several different ones.
All right. So we've talked about what a canvas is from a pattern and what it is in a conceptual model, and then the tooling of that conceptual model. And so what's on the slide, which you may have already read, the idea of the iceberg, I thought was really good to help illustrate what you're trying to get at with a canvas. What you can see, the practical component is, hey, when should we meet? Do we have core hours? Let's get that tactical stuff out of the way so we just, know where to go look if we don't memorize it, or, if it doesn't sort of like make sense, but culturally how we do things, if it's a little bit different for our teams. Then there's the principles, which are, hey, are we an agile team? Like, are we adhering to those principles? Which is, definition of done, definition of ready, right? Stuff that you guys all are aware of. Then there's the deeper value of what are our values, right? Sorry, no pun intended, but just what are our values? And you can either think about it building up from what are our values, or thinking top down, what's the tactical, but either way, in order for a team canvas to be successful, you want to cover all of those things. And I've always looked at a canvas as works great when you're starting a new team. Lots of things are helpful when you're starting a new team. But I've also found that canvases can be, or specifically a team canvas is phenomenal when you're rebooting a team, because they've gone through churn, whatever that might be. And this offers a structured way to air out the concepts that are frustrating people, and their peers understand what is frustrating. And so I'm going to jump to what I think might be helpful for all of you, which is a canvas that I came up with that is using a combination of things. So starting from the top left box and going around to each one of the different numbers. So top left is the team name, just sort of like, what is it? The individual's name, the date that you did it. So call it that, the point in time. Box one is, what are the goals? What are the tangible goals that the team has? So it's a team first concept. So the first row is all about teaming, aspirational things. The middle portion, middle tranche, if you will, is getting at the individual. And then the bottom is the tactical and what are some of the takeaways. So when you look at it from that perspective, you've got what is the problem in box two that we're trying to solve. It seems like lots of teams sometimes don't really understand what is it we're trying to solve, because they might say, oh, we're a DevOps team. And I'm just picking on DevOps folks because I'm a big fan of DevOps teams. Sometimes they look at it in a very sort of specific way. We're coming up with tooling for people to use. Like, is that inspirational? Is that inspiring? You get up in the morning because you want to build those tools? Some people do, but for the most part, no, you want to build an ecosystem whereby developers have a self-service portal. I get excited about building something like that. In that case, words matter. So if you are building that type of thing, a self-service portal that allows engineers to be self-service, then now you've just enabled the team to empower itself, because now they can go do things that are in service of that mission. So that's where that matters. Using the hypothesis, this is the part where it's extremely helpful, because when you are thinking about what is the team trying to do, they can evaluate the success of their team that they're on by understanding the hypothesis that they have given themselves. You know, we're forming this team because we think that by doing so, we're going to achieve X, Y, or Z. 4 months in on a monthly basis, you know, not every retro, but maybe every 2 to 3 retros. How are we doing? Are we successfully meeting why we thought this team was in place? And that also helps the team to go, hey, I don't think we are, but here's how I think we might be able to, right? And that's a constructive conversation. That's not a negative approach. The concerns, this isn't a box where I'll call it your negative Nancy's. If someone's like, I don't think this team is going to be successful for whatever reason. Okay, well, what is that reason? Is it because this person doesn't have the skills and they're looking at it from their own perspective, or they think, hey, the team doesn't have the resources that they need, from whether it be budget, they don't have the physical space that they need, they don't have the cloud environments, whatever it might be. There's usually not more than, say, 3 or 4. I always look at that as an area where, as a coach, well, now you get your marching orders, right? You can start adding a whole lot of tangible value by starting to figure out how to resolve those things. In some cases, if it's just perception, score. Like, that's an easy win. Like, once you take that to the bank, that's a layup. Like, if it's a perception and you can get that perception resolved inside of a week, love it. Teams will be like, I love having coaches on my team. They're like resolving the problems that I've got. Phenomenal. Christmas came early. And then success factor. You know, what do you think the team actually needs to do in order to be successful? I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but calling it out, because when there is a success, let's celebrate it. Let's get excited about our successes. And then my superpower, I think this is the thing that doesn't get talked about a lot, because on teams, if people have worked together for a long time, then they probably know the counterparts areas where they are or do have superpowers. But if someone's new, for example, if there's an intern on the team, or if there's someone that's a new hire, or for whatever reason, they're just net new to the team and don't know everyone, as long as other people on the team might know each other, might be helpful to know, like, hey, someone's got really some front end experience, or hey, they really want to know front end experience. They've been fooling around with it on the weekend, whatever it might be. That's an area where they can contribute. And so saying that out loud to the larger team is super helpful. So that way, when something does come up, it might be 100% applicable, or it might be 50-50, but either way, you know that that person is all in for, like, yeah, I don't know it like 100%, but like, that's an area where I'm really interested and passionate about. I'd love to jump in and support that. Box number 7, tactical preferences. That's, I think, really straightforward. You know, what are your core hours? Just putting it on paper so everyone can agree. And then the other thing is so people can disagree. As an example, a guy I was working with on a team, he had, you know, like lots of people have families. He was taking the commuter rail, and he's like, I can't get to the office really before 10. Not that I'm not trying to be here, but between, you know, having calls with people in Europe and then driving into downtown Boston, blah, 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 it's going to be hard to get here before 10, but I can get here at 10. I can be here right before 10. And then whatever that might be, okay, well, now the team knows how to sort of orchestrate and schedule itself. I'm not going to say a whole lot more about that. Then learning is the bucket where it's like, hey, here's what I'm interested in learning something. Here's what I want to explore. And people can get creative about that. And then the last bucket, number 9, is how do we want to celebrate? Let's not forget to celebrate. So let's talk about it. And what might that be? So I've just thrown a whole bunch at you and walked through the different boxes. And I'll say, pick on Alex and say, hey, Alex, back to the first question you had, you know, like eons ago, like an hour ago. And is this a tactical way, a practical way for you to take your earlier thought and concern for empowering and giving the team a way to work? And if not, I hear you too. Just was curious.
It's not the empowering aspect that I had issues with, because that, I said, it was the foundation.
Oh, sorry.
It was the it was the ego. It was the ego. How do you lose the ego, and so on. But what I like about this one is it is extremely structured and broken down in bite-sized pieces, so it's easy to actually fill each box. So like this, you don't have a big, like, how do I deal with this? So trying to break it down, and we saw it before, trying to break it down as clear and as small as possible, and everybody to be on the same page, and everybody can understand this. Like it's simple, it's to the point. It's, yeah, I like it.
Okay, and you are not a paid advertisement, that's correct?
No, I'm not. I'm not. No, it's the first time that I see it, and
Yeah.
I do like it because it does make sense. To me, it does make sense.
Okay, so that I think is pretty much everything I had tonight. If you want to get the canvas, I have a blog post where you can download the PDF and you can start using it and editing it and sort of cranking away at it. Mainly because this screenshot, the resolution's a little off on my monitor, so the PDF is not blurry at all.
Can you put that link in the chat? Or,
It's on my last slide. I'm almost there.
cool,
So
thank you.
just to recap real quickly, I'll just say, hey, we talked about teamwork. We talked about motivation and Dan Pink and how coaches can help there. The last element we just talked about was the team canvas and how to use that. And the aim with today's talk was to help you go from something that's really high level, 50,000 foot view, teamwork, this huge thing. How do we get teams to be effective? And then figure out motivation, individuals who make up that team. And then the team canvas was giving you something practical for how to work with individuals that make up the larger team. The aim being here that over, say, a 4 to 6 month period, you can use the team canvas, you can understand motivation, and then help the team to be more effective. The result being that they are producing and they are more practical and predictable about what they're doing, whatever it is that the team is being asked to do, because teams that are more predictable build trust with the larger organization. So that's all I have to share with you tonight. And to the person who was asking about the link, you can jump to my my blog at Pono Labs, and then you can just do a quick search for Canvas. It's one of the blog posts there. Selfless, shameful plug. I have an ebook. You can go and you can purchase that ebook. There's some other stuff that I talk about in that ebook. And then if you want to ping me on LinkedIn, it'd be great to stay connected with all of you. Any other closing thoughts, remarks?
You had said with the team canvas that it was mostly tactical, right?
Yes.
Okay,
So my sense of tactical is that the bottom third is tactical, very practical. But
yep,
then in the larger sense of how you work with teams, it's really helpful. You can also use it to work with executives because it helps them at the large level. It's got their goals, it's got the problems they're trying to solve, and how they can start thinking about how to measure and use hypothesis. So from a product perspective, if your product organization is using things like quarterly planning, or just we'll say planning in general, that generally seems to be an area where agile teams and executives seem to struggle. If they're just generally seems to be an area. So when you think about the hypothesis and writing one with executives, they can think about how they want to measure themselves in a way that's a little bit easier to connect with. And then teams can use that to say, hey, we want to support this thing. And so you end up with a lot more connective tissue. Some organizations are moving to OKR, so it ends up being a little bit easier because OKRs have that sort of Christmas tree effect of how they connect. Does that help answer your question, or have I made it?
yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you very much, Justin. So just for next month, we have Jim Byers. He's coming on May 23rd, which is actually the 4th Tuesday. And he's going to present tips, tricks, and hacks for video call presentation. Zoom your way to a better experience. So we hope to see you all for next month. And again, thank you very much, Justin.
Yeah, Justin, thank you. It was a good presentation. And then just I'd be remiss if there are any other questions from the audience
Yep.
Justin, before any of us.
Yeah, Justin, I had one real quick. So with the Canvas, and this is more of a procedural type question. The Canvas mentions team in a few places, and it mentions my and I in a few places. Procedurally, how do you put one of these together, or how would you recommend, where every person sits down and does one privately, even when they talk about what they think the team is going to be doing, and then they sit down together and put them together? Do you follow what I'm getting at? Because some of this is about the team and some of it is about
The individuals on the team.
right. So how does it come together into one canvas, or what would be your advice as a good way to marry those together into one?
Sure. So there's a couple ways that I've seen it done. So I'll start off with what I have done. When I came up with the canvas, we were physically in person and going to work, not virtual.
Back in the day.
So what we did was I put a time timer up, and I gave everyone, I think it was maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, something like that, and said, go here through each box. I took 5 minutes to walk through what each box kind of meant, and then said, hey, take 15 minutes and just make your way through it. And then after everyone was done, after that 15 minutes, I said, let's not ask any questions. Let's just go around the table, have everyone read off what's in their canvas so that everyone could share what they had, just on no interruptions. Then the next step was, hey, let's figure out which ones make sense for us to combine and put up on one of those big
To distill down
post-it.
into the big canvas. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Because for things like the tactical preferences, that's always an easy one to start with, even though it's number 7. It's just easy to start with because people are like, hey, I can't do this time, that time. And they get through that like super quickly. And then they start getting on a roll. You get to things like hypothesis and the problem, that's gonna take
conceptual, right? Yeah, it takes time.
So I generally try and start with the quick wins, because then when they leave the meeting, then they know, hey, they left, they've got some hey, I know we're gonna work kind of this way. I'll call it, sort of your working agreements, but I'll call it working agreements light from this Canvas perspective. And then the idea is, after the fact, it's let the team figure out how they want to work it. And then some teams, it might be, hey, let's come back and finish it out. So that's how I've worked it. Other coaches, when they've used it, they have given it as homework before retro. So they've done it that way. That's one way to do it, but you're gonna end up with a bunch of individual questions. So you got to figure out how to help people understand what they're supposed to do. So they end up writing a bunch of instructions. So it ends up being a kind of longish email. But to be fair, that approach has worked. So they can be like, hey, talk about it in the retrospective, give it as homework, and then come back at the next retro. So it takes, anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to get it all done. And then I've done other things where working with the CTO in my last role, we did the Simon Sinek start with why. So we came up with a why statement for his organization. And so we were able to plug in what's the problem we're trying to solve and a couple of other things. So it helped to accelerate using the team canvas. So those are 3 different approaches, and you got to just pick whichever way works best for you as a coach, because it needs to be natural for you to facilitate doing it.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
But it's not only a question of for us to be able to facilitate, it's a question for them to understand as well and to be able to handle it. I have a team that is a little bit spread out, and when you said, okay, fine, I'll give them homework and then we'll figure out in 2 weeks, that actually helped. Because I was thinking about it, like, it's one thing to have everybody in the same room, which I cannot have that, but giving them the 15-minute speech of what it is, the explanations, basically a YouTube video, here's the link, whatever, and then afterwards the explanations, the canvas, that I think would work for me, because otherwise I don't think, and then coming back and trying to figure out, and everybody's going to have different ideas and so on. But anyways.
Yeah, I generally follow the approach that it's better to do it live, and so if you move quickly, you can kind of get it done in 90 minutes, and so that's why you kind of need to have I'll call it the the onus to actually need to have like a reboot done or refocus done. So you need to have something that will be the cause for why you need to do this, as opposed to just doing it for the sake of doing it.
Of doing it. Now, it's when you're saying live, I have one question regarding the difference between them. Not necessarily in person, but it may be a Zoom
Yeah.
conference.
Yes,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, what it meant, you could do it like we're doing it right now.
Yeah. Okay.
15 minutes and
Perfect.
explain it that way. And in some cases, that's actually easier than doing it sort of in person. In fact, I would say the Canvas doesn't require you to like try and get people to meet in person. So that's not where I was going. I was just saying more
Okay.
instead of asynchronously, just schedule something and you could do it virtually.
Thank you.
Yep. Oh, and one other thing, I put the link to the Canvas specifically, so you can just download it if you feel like, hey, like I want to fool around with it and try it. So the PDF is there in the chat.
Well, I'm telling you, I'm gonna try it and I'm gonna send you feedback on that one.
Yeah. So my email. That's where my email is, and actually, if you guys are you guys able to stay on, I can just drop the PDF of the presentation in the chat if that's helpful, Pepe. Maybe save a step.
Yep.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right, so there you go. That's the PDF for the presentation.
Justin, while you type, just a clarifying question. You mentioned that the sort of like the timeline for going through an exercise like this, the assumption is that it's a sort of like a small team, right? If you get together a group of 20, this may take you much longer than that.
Yeah, so the 90 minutes that I gave was optimizing around a typical Scrum team. So think 7 people, maybe 8. If you get larger than that, just going around the table will take you a half hour. So you need to think about your culture of how people think of meetings and conversations like this. I'd say certain executive groups might find value like it as well.
I have a question actually for everyone, and because I was totally surprised by this. 3 months to 6 months to create a team, that's, to me, that is brutal. That is too long. Normally I've done it under 3 months on all of them, and sometimes a month and a half, depending on the environment. But 3 to 6 months, that's
When I said 3 to 6 months, I was thinking if you have a team that's in a challenging culture and their mindset is very demoralized. For example, if you just had layoffs and they're being expected to continue working, I'll say for the last company that I was working for, you end up with a private equity firm, they make adjustments, right? And so now you've got a bunch of people working together from like one company, another company, or whatever it might be. You got to sort of you have to figure out what those things are, and you're not necessarily as a coach going to know what they are day one walking in. You'll know some of them maybe, but you got to give yourself some time to be successful, as opposed to expecting that you're going to get there in a month, because let's be honest, for most teams, a month is 2 sprints. How much do you really get accomplished?
yeah, no, from what you said from before, it makes sense. Depending on the environment, the situation, and so on, that makes sense. And now I understand what you're referring to. Thank you.
But to be fair, not all companies have that as an issue. I was thinking, maybe the more darkest of situations, if it's not as dark, then I totally agree with you. A month is probably fair.
Any other questions for Justin?
Thanks very much.
You're welcome very much. And Linda, if you want to, reach out and, next week, maybe we can, talk about something, meet virtually or whatever, just because, we're New Hampshire awesome folks.
Sounds
Not
good.
the people who aren't in New Hampshire aren't awesome, just that,
Yeah, I'll definitely reach out.
okay. And of course-
Anybody from Montreal? No.
Been there,
Okay,
can't wait
thank you
to go
very much
back,
for the
but-
answer.
I'm from Salem, so not too far from New Hampshire.
But let's connect in LinkedIn and then we'll plan a visit to Montreal. So I'm gonna stop the recording, and then we'll